Good evening. You're watching the special extended edition of The Buck Stops Here, and I'm Barkha Dutt. On the program this evening, Narendra Modi, India's next Prime Minister to be, has spent his day in Delhi, the political capital. And he's been holding marathon meetings with all the key leaders of the BJP, including those who have been traditionally not seen to be in the Modi camp. There you can see him meeting with LK Advani. Many questions being raised over what Mr. Advani's role will be. Could he be the next speaker in the Lok Sabha? Narendra Modi also met with Murli Manohar Joshi, again somebody not seen to be extremely close with Mr. Modi. Still to meet Sushma Swaraj. That's going to be a big question. What role will she play in the next cabinet? Alongside these meetings, BJP leaders have continued to meet with RSS leadership. Uma Bharti, Venkaiah Naidu are among those leaders who have met with the RSS leaders. And in the past week, other key leaders of the BJP, including Amit Shah, the man who delivered 73 seats in Uttar Pradesh, and Nitin Gadkari, the former party president, have also met with RSS leaders. Let's take it straight to my colleague Rahul Srivastav, who's been tracking Mr. Modi's day in Delhi. Rahul, a number of those meetings important, smoothening in a sense, or softening at least the rough edges. Modi meeting with Advani, Modi meeting with Joshi. Still, of course, not having met Sushma Swaraj, but that's likely to happen as well. These are perhaps the three difficult relationships for Mr. Modi within the BJP as he puts together his new cabinet, his new team.
Yes, Bakha, for the last several elections, we have seen that there has been a balancing act because of the coalitions. At a time when there's been a verdict in which the opposition will need some kind of a coalition, it's slightly difficult for Narendra Modi to to balance the various elements of government formation. He has to take care of the new look cabinet, which will deliver the promises he has made. He has to balance the interest of the old guard like LK Advani and Sushma Swaraj and others, as you have said. Also, then there is the RSS. RSS has driven this election in an unprecedented manner. And though the BJP may deny, but I think the biggest element which has to be decided by the RSS, if you look beyond these meetings which have taken place, meeting with LK Advani, no meeting with Sushma Swaraj and meeting with Murli Manohar Joshi, is perhaps what kind of powers does the RSS want to give Mr. Narendra Modi? If you recall, Mr. Rajnath Singh in an early interview had said that he does not want two power centers. That's one factor which the RSS has to decide. If Rajnath Singh remains president of the party, which he wants right now, that will mean that Narendra Modi goes ahead as somebody who controls the government. Rajnath Singh looks after the organization and especially the elections which are going to come around. If Rajnath Singh comes into the cabinet, that might be an indication that Nitin Gadkari, though very close to the RSS, is not as senior as Rajnath Singh. That will indicate that somewhere in a crucial bodies like the CCS and others, the RSS wants somebody as trusted as Rajnath Singh somewhere to address its agenda as far as the government is concerned. There will be some kind of a power sharing. Right now, there is no problem between Modi and Rajnath. They have been seen together and they have seemed to have worked well together. So the RSS has no crisis as far as that is concerned.
Okay.
But all these elements will also decide once Arun Jaitley and others get decided who will be part of the big four. Sushma Swaraj wants to be there. How will Modi-Sushma relationship work out there? Then comes LK Advani, who's looking for a speaker's job, does not want his protocol to get impacted. Right. I have seen a list which has been made by a meeting between Mr. Suresh Soni, Rajnath Singh and others that has junior ministers and several other not so key portfolios.
But may I interrupt you there, because the fact that you're saying that this list has been made by Suresh Soni of the RSS and other senior leaders of the BJP raises the immediate question of the role that the RSS will play or not play in the cabinet formation. So very briefly, Rahul, we have everybody denying it on record that RSS will have a say in cabinet formation. So how much influence is it really going to have?
Barkha, there was a meeting between the top RSS functionaries and Mr. Rajnath Singh. In that meeting, a statewide assessment of who has won, who has lost was done. And in that, who could be the possible people into the Council of Ministers, a decision on that was taken. It is still work in progress, but a broad consensus was arrived at. Primarily, that was largely a list which is all about regional, caste and other representations into the Council of Ministers. But I think the key portfolios and the key decisions are still to be taken, and I think eventually that will take some bit of time, primarily because a lot of of roles, who is going to do what, and how they are going to fit into the new pass dispensation of the BJP, run partially from behind by the RSS, is going to get decided.
All right, Rahul Srivastava, thanks very much. Mr. Modi's day in Delhi, spending the day in those marathon meetings, and questions being asked again and again as to how Mr. Modi, with the decisive mandate he has, will navigate his relationship with the RSS. That is going to be especially interesting to watch. All right, let's move on now to our big debate on the program tonight. It's quite interesting what's happening with the two I don't even know if you can call Congress, I was going to say the two main parties, but well, okay, it's quite interesting to see what's happening with the Congress and the BJP. Can't call Congress one of the main parties anymore, given its drubbing in these elections. But what is clear is that as the BJP plans its future, the Congress is weighing its past. And on our program today, let me introduce our panel. With me in the studio, Sir Mark Tully. He's, of course, well-known author and writer who's made India his home now for many, many decades. From the Congress, we're joined by Abhishek Singhvi. And from the BJP, we're joined by its senior leader, Sudhanshu Trivedi. And before I come to you, gentlemen, there are two very important interviews that have taken place today, and both raise interesting questions over what's happening within the BJP and what's happening within the Congress. First, this question over what role the RSS will play on cabinet formation, on government formation, and indeed on government policy. This is Uma Bharti talking to me on the role of the RSS earlier today. आरएसएस के बारे में जब बीजेपी से पूछा जाता है तो वो कहते हैं हमारा आइडियोलॉजिकल गाइड है। कुछ लोग कहते हैं ये कल्चरल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, राजनीति पर उनका कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं है। लेकिन हम पिछले 2-3 दिन से देख रहे हैं आरएसएस की सभी सीनियर लीडर्स और बीजेपी की भी कई लीडर्स आपस में मिल बैठ रहे हैं। आप भी आज आरएसएस की लीडरशिप से मिली। आरएसएस का क्या रोल रहेगा अगली सरकार और अगली कैबिनेट के फॉर्मेशन में?
इसको स्वीकार करने में कोई संकोच और गुरेज नहीं होना चाहिए कि आरएसएस हमारा नीति निर्देशक है और वो जो नीतियां हमें हमारे रक्त में घुल मिल जाती हैं, उन्होंने जो बातें कही हैं, इसलिए उन्हें बार बार हमें रिमाइंड भी नहीं कराना पड़ता। हमें ध्यान रहता है कि हमारी मर्यादाएं क्या, हमारी लिमिट क्या है। दूसरा, आपके माध्यम से पूरे देशवासियों को मैं बताना चाहती हूँ कि मोदी जी संघ के प्रचारक रहे हैं, खाली संघ के स्वयंसेवक नहीं रहे हैं। और उन्होंने जो एक अच्छी जीवन शैली जो उनकी है और इतनी मेहनत करने के बाद में भी वो जो स्वस्थ रहते हैं, उसका कारण है कि वो संघ के प्रचारक रहे हैं। उनकी एक बहुत अच्छी दिनचर्या रही है और उनका जो निजी जीवन भी बहुत साफ सुथरा रहा है, उसका कारण संघ का प्रचारक होना रहा है। तो ये तो सच्चाई है कि संघ के स्वयंसेवकों ने अभी बहुत डट के काम किया है। लेकिन ये भी एक सच्चाई है कि संघ के लोग डे टू डे बेसिस पर भारतीय जनता पार्टी को डिस्टर्ब नहीं करते जो बाहर बातें आती हैं। जैसे मैं आज संघ कार्यालय गई तो मैं कोई बीजेपी डिस्कस करने के लिए नहीं गई। हमारे कई वरिष्ठ प्रचारक हैं जिनको मैं बहुत मानती हूँ और सब लोग बहुत चिंतित थे जब मैं झांसी से चुनाव लड़ रही थी कि मेरा स्वास्थ्य ठीक है कि नहीं। तो मैं सिर्फ उनको मिलने के लिए गई और दिखाने के लिए गई कि मैं प्रसन्न हूँ और मैं स्वस्थ हूँ। तो हर चीज में वो लोग नहीं टोकते, लेकिन ये सच्चाई है कि उन्होंने तो हमारे खून में ही वो चीजें मिला दी हैं जिनसे कि हमें अपना जीवन चलाना है, तो रोज उन्हें टोकने की जरूरत भी नहीं पड़ती है।
लेकिन जो लोग कहते हैं और कांग्रेस के कई नेता कहते हैं कि आप लोग हमारे बारे में कहते हैं कि हमारा रिमोट कंट्रोल 10 जनपद से चलता है, तो बीजेपी का रिमोट कंट्रोल नागपुर से चलता है।
नहीं, रिमोट कंट्रोल की जरूरत ही नहीं है। हम सेल्फ कंट्रोल में ही उनके द्वारा आ गए हैं। वो जो सोचते हैं वैसा हम सोचने लगे हैं, तो इसलिए रिमोट कंट्रोल की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती है। और अब तो देशवासियों ने उस पर मुहर लगा दी है। संघ का एक स्वयंसेवक जो कि प्रचारक भी रहा है, आज वो देश का प्रधानमंत्री बनने जा रहा है। इसलिए कम से कम अब तो कांग्रेस के लोग और हमारे वामपंथी आलोचक वो नतमस्तक होकर के लोगों के जनादेश को स्वीकार कर ले। लोगों ने ही हमारी आइडियोलॉजी को एक्सेप्ट कर लिया है।
That's Uma Bharti being very, very candid there about RSS and its teachings being in the blood of the BJP leadership. In the last few minutes, there's also news coming in that Sushma Swaraj, many questions about what her role will be in the cabinet formation. Sushma Swaraj also meeting with RSS leaders. Now, before I bring in our panel, we've heard a perspective from the BJP. Now, an interesting perspective from the Congress. Outgoing minister and now the senior most MP in Parliament, Kamal Nath, one of the few in the Congress to win his seat, is now calling for elections to the Congress Working Committee. This is ahead of the CWC meeting tomorrow, where it's widely expected that Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi will at least offer to resign from their party positions. If you had to recommend one surgical solution, because sometimes you need surgery to heal things, what would it be for the Congress party?
I think we should have a working committee which is elected, and Rahul Gandhi has been saying this for the last 2 years, that we should have a working committee which is elected, and all those who, to protect themselves, oppose this are causing immense damage. I completely agree with Mr. Rahul Gandhi. We should have an elected working committee. Then this culture, this culture of people, who are being bestowed with patronage is going to end.
All right, Kamal Nath saying end the culture of patronage. Uma Bharti saying the RSS teachings are in the blood of the BJP. The BJP's Amit Shah denying to me on record that the RSS will have any say in cabinet formation. Interesting parallels being drawn by commentators between the Parivar in the Sangh and the family in the Congress. Let's now get started with our panel. Sudhanshu Trivedi, I'd like to start with you. If the RSS is playing no role in cabinet formation, why are so many of the senior BJP leaders, including the party president Rajnath Singh, meeting with the RSS? What exactly is this relationship going to be as Mr. Modi gets set to form his new cabinet, his new government?
First of all, I would like to clarify that RSS doesn't play any role in the day-to-day functioning or, for that matter, any policy-making, decision-making process of BJP. But it is a fact that most of our leaders are the Swayamsevaks of RSS. We draw our inspiration from the dedication and discipline of RSS, the ideology of the RSS, as Uma Bharti ji was saying, and we are proud that other than Nehru Gandhi family, the two tallest leaders in the post-independence history, Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Sri Narendra Modi, who have rose to the stature at one point of time over and above the Gandhi family, both are the Swayamsevaks of RSS. So RSS just inspires dedication and discipline and creates a new Karyakarta, Swayamsevaks, and when they come to BJP, the political decision making is totally taken by the leaders of the BJP.
But Sudhanshu ji, then what are all these meetings about? Sushma Swaraj is meeting with them, Venkaiah Naidu is meeting with them, Uma Bharti is meeting with them, Rajnath Singh ji met with them, Amit Shah met with them, Nitin Gadkari met with them. What are these meetings about then?
As I have already told, that on certain policy matters, on the issue of culture, on the issue of society, because they are having a most extensive social organization. Their Swayamsevaks have also worked not only in the political field, whether it is Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram or whether it is Seva Bharti or so many things. So sometimes we also try to get input, which is very essential from non-political social organizations. And also since both the leaders are of the same family, we go and discuss and try to get an input from the social organization. I don't think there is nothing wrong.
Okay.
I don't think there is anything wrong in that.
Okay, Abhishek Singhvi, do you have a Parivar problem of your own? The Parivar problem being, of course, the Gandhi family. Are we going to see this charade play out tomorrow where Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi offer to resign and everybody in the CWC says no? And also comment on Kamal Nath, who's now your senior most MP, saying it's high time that there are internal elections, the culture of patronage has to end. That has to be the bluntest statement I've heard from the Congress since this debacle.
3 or 4 things, Barkha. By the way, I'm getting a terrible echo. I like the sound of my own voice, but not so much of it.
We'll try and fix it. Yeah.
First and foremost, I don't want to say anything which sounds churlish in this magnificent hour of victory of the BJP and Mr. Modi. I've already congratulated them and therefore I don't want to sound nitpicking. But I'm forced to answer your question, and the simple answer is that I actually think that the BJP should be open about the fact that the master remote control is the RSS. I mean, these fine distinctions don't convince anybody. It's an old, not even the most open secret of India, that every decision, every major decision is controlled by the RSS. We've had enough Jinnahs, Advanis, enough other clashes to know that. And today, if Mr. Modi, a active RSS person, is becoming Prime Minister, what's the harm if they acknowledge the fact that all major decisions are being taken in consultation between Mr. Modi and the RSS? So that's point number one. I think there is no harm in acknowledging it and being less hypocritical. Number two, we are definitely less hypocritical about this because we have made it clear who our president is, who our vice president is. They are Gandhis, but we don't hide that fact. And therefore, there is no Parivar problem, as you call it.
No,
thirdly,
in your case, the Parivar problem is that the Parivar continues to exert a kind of influence or command a kind of obeisance which is not delivering electoral results.
That's a different matter. That's a different issue. But we do not have a Parivar which doesn't occupy any position in the party and is therefore unaccountable, but yet exerts de facto pressure. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
As far as electoral results are concerned, it is the same Parivar which has got us 400 it has got us two 5-year terms into 10 years. So if you have got 10 years and you won 21 assembly cases between those 10 years, 21 assembly states, then surely you can't just sit in the opposition once. That is not to say, Barkha, that's my fourth point, that we don't need surgical, absolute, clinical reform. I have one of the few who has written openly in the Hindu, published article, given 7 reforms. I've been very open about it.
Okay.
And I think each of those must be done.
So you,
I don't at all
agree with
reject Mr. Kamal Nath's.
Do you agree with him?
I do not reject Mr. Kamal Nath's. Can I just answer?
Yes.
I don't at all reject it outright. It is something requiring deep consideration. In principle, it may well actually be something I would like to be implemented. I would only add a small caveat.
Yes.
When you are in difficulty, when you are down in the doldrums as we are, you need to hasten a little slowly. You need to, build it up. There must be a reform every day, incrementally, but don't shake it up together so much that you are not able to come out of this depressive mode.
Okay.
So I would say in principle there's nothing wrong, but hasten a little slowly, carry people with you, and then yes, maybe in the immediate second phase after a few weeks or few months, you can do this election thing also.
Okay.
But that reform is vital, it is to be radical, it has to be clinical, surgical, without regard to consequences. I have no hesitation in saying, and you can read my 7 suggestions which are pretty, radical.
Okay, just briefly, Sudhanshu Trivedi, before I get Samak Ali in, to the accusation made by the Congress that you're hiding the levels of influence that the RSS is exerting. We all remember 1998.
We are not hiding at all.
But we all remember 1998 when the RSS stopped. I remember this, Jaswant Singh from becoming finance minister, just to give you one example.
We are not hiding at all. If our leaders are going in open and discussing with RSS leaders, what is the point of hiding? We are not saying that when there is a defeat, it is for the local leaders, and when there is a victory, it is for their Gandhi family. So we are not going. In our situation, the defeat and the victory both are the collective responsibility, which is just the teaching of the Swayam Sevaks and the Parivar. And one more point I would like to say, though it is the internal matter of the Congress, but if you look at the history, post-independence, every time when Congress got out of power, they faced a severe crisis and they got divided. Whether it was 1969, when they were out of power in certain states, in 1979, when they were out of power in center, and 1990s when NCP and Tiwari Congress went out, then they were out of power by BJP. So now, since they are out of power, and that too with such a decimation, so in my opinion, there is a troubled time for them.
Yeah, there's certainly troubled times, and that's an understatement. So, Mark Tully, when you look at both these parties, and as I said in my introduction, I was going to say the two main parties, and then I stopped myself because I don't even know if the Congress qualifies now to be the main opposition party. That's a decision the Speaker will.
Certainly not the official opposition.
Certainly not the official opposition. Do you believe that there is any parallel between the Parivar of the Sangh and the Parivar of the Congress in terms of all the influence being centered around these two power centers?
No, I don't think there is myself. I think the two questions are different, and in a way that was made clear in Abhishek's answer.
Yes.
The Congress party is in the control of the Gandhi family, let's face it. And Abhishek said their role is open and it's clear to everyone. The Sangh Parivar is, in a way, as Uma Bharti said, in the blood of the BJP. But you could never say, for instance, that Atal Bihari Vajpayee was completely controlled by the Sangh.
In fact, he was not.
No. You couldn't say that Lal Krishna Advani was controlled by the Sangh.
Because he still wrote his book on Jinnah. Yes.
So I think this is the difference. You cannot deny, although I dare say Abhishek will deny it, but I would say you cannot deny that the Congress is in control of the Gandhi
family. So are you
family.
actually saying that the Gandhi's control of the Congress is much more absolutist than the RSS control over
Absolutely,
the BJP?
Yeah, I think it's of a different order. One is a sort of subtle, much more of a subtle, or not always that subtle, influence, which varies according to the closeness of the person to the RSS, according to his own desire to be independent in the case of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. But no congressman can
afford
say
to
that
be
I am
autonomous of
I
the
am not
Gandhis.
loyal and in the control, in a sense. Perhaps control is too strong a word, but I would say it's not too strong a word.
Very interesting. And Abhishek, I know your hand is up. Give me half a second. How do you see Mr. Modi then navigating this relationship? Because he's got a mandate where he can probably be his own man.
Well, I think Mr. Modi will be aware of the fact that in some ways he is at the least a very atypical figure for the Sangh Parivar, because the Sangh Parivar likes to think of itself as a family and does not like to have people who really are bigger than anyone else, dominant figures in it.
Yes.
And there will be many people in the Sangh Parivar all along who have been worried really about the emergence of Mr. Modi, because he seems to be the one guy who is almost above the Parivar, almost above the BJP.
Very interesting. So two interesting perspectives for both parties. Abhishek Singhvi, Sudhanshu Trivedi, let's take it back to you. Mr. Singhvi, go ahead. A very interesting point being made by Samak, that, you know, you can still be a BJP Prime Minister who deviates or who establishes an autonomous space, autonomous of Nagpur, autonomous of the RSS, but in the Congress you can never be a substantive leader who's autonomous of the Gandhis.
Let me tell you in what context I partially disagree with my very good friend Mr. Tully, and I have great respect for his political analysis, but I think he's got it wrong partially for this reason. Look, we are not talking of routine things. We are not talking of ordinary day-to-day life decisions. Please tell me, over the last 100 years or 80 years history, a single time or case when push has come to shove, when any major decision is involved, that the RSS has not prevailed, or that those who oppose the RSS have prevailed. Mr. Advani, as president, and at that time a far more powerful and non-effete president than the person he now is, had to succumb as president to the RSS for a mere remark he made. Mr. Vajpayee could never actually take a decision. It took 2 years before he could replace Mr. Yashwant Sinha with Mr. Jaswant Singh in a totally different context. Tell me a single major decision. So when pushed, obviously, where the RSS doesn't want to exert itself about an individual decision, nobody is saying. The test comes where there is a real collision, and where there is a real collision, the RSS always prevails.
But that's about the RSS. Complete, what about the Gandhis?
But it is unaccountable. It is unaccountable.
Okay, that's your
because
perspective.
It is not the actual party president.
What about
number
the
two on yes. Number two, I do agree with him that Mr. Modi is perhaps the only person, and he needs both kudos and eventually may get criticism for it. He's the only person in Indian history of politics who has transcended his own party, and he may well transcend the RSS, which is where the problem will start. Because today there are a large number of people out there who have voted not for the individual parliamentary candidate. In fact, I know people who hate the candidate, but have voted for that hated candidate only because they think they are voting for Modi.
No, that's a fair point.
So a man who transcends the party
yes.
and is likely to transcend the RSS itself is both a plus and a threat. And that's the future which we have to beware. As far as the Gandhis are concerned, as far as the Gandhis are concerned, the Gandhis are the president and the vice president of the party. They have proved time and again to be a cementing force in the Congress. In the ultimate analysis, let me tell you, no Gandhi, or for that matter Nehru, has tried to stick on to the post. That's the fundamental point you forget. There has been a lot of Jaddojihad and people saying, no, they must be there. But there has been never a forced entry. On the contrary, if anything, Mrs. Gandhi denied all the forces to become Prime Minister.
Okay, I think...
So therefore, you find a situation where the Gandhis have actually not really in that desperate sense looked for the post.
But you know,
but they've been seen by Congress persons
as
cementing forces and therefore necessary for the benefit of the party,
but some
which is a call the Congress takes.
May I interrupt
and if you win 21 assemblies with them, you have to take the good with the bad.
But the point, the point, Abhishek, and is that some would say that they have wielded power without responsibility, and therefore it's not exactly renunciation. But
tell me only 1 second, Barkha. Tell me how, in constitutional sense, legal sense, or de facto sense, can you wield power without responsibility?
I'm going to let
you are a party president up front.
I'm going to let Mark Tully come in.
The only difference is
Abhishek, I think you've had your say.
The only difference is that Mr. Jitendra Prasad fought the election also.
Okay, we're just getting
Against the party
Samak Tali's
president.
mic
We
back
haven't had
onto
it
him.
regularly.
Can we just get Samak Tali's mic back onto him, and then we will bring in Sudhanshu in the meantime. Sudhanshu Trivedi, while Mark Tali is of course disagreeing with Abhishek, and we'll get him to come in just a moment, respond to what Abhishek Singhvi is saying and Samak Tali has said about Modi being larger than the party, Modi being larger than the Parivar.
Actually, what happens, those who do not understand BJP or those who do not understand Parivar, they come to this type of conclusion very early that someone has become larger than Parivar and others. Number one, Modi ji cannot be seen in separation or in isolation with BJP. When Modi ji himself acknowledges and feels pride of being his RSS descendancy, there is no question of taking itself as a separate entity. And the other thing, I think the comparison between the Gandhi Parivar and Sangh Parivar is not fair at all. The Gandhi Parivar already assumed power for 3 generations.
Yes.
And finally, by force of circumstances, they were unable to hold the power position, or they couldn't dare to hold the power position. Then they were keeping away. On the other hand, the RSS never assumes any post, and they never try to assume any position.
Yeah.
They used to a phrase, Prasiddhi Parangmukh in Hindi, or you can say in Sanskrit, it means away from popularity and power. The Gandhi Parivar retains authority by belittling the leadership, like Rahul Gandhi tearing apart the ordinance or ordering in Talkatora that Prime Minister, Pradhan Mantri Mahoday, mujhe 3 cylinder chahiye. On the other hand, RSS inspires and creates leadership. There is a vast difference between those two. I don't think there is any common point of comparison between these two things, that Gandhi Parivar and Sangh Parivar.
Okay. Mark Tali, on Abhishek's point that the Gandhis have on more than one occasion given up power.
Well, they haven't actually given up power, and on any occasion that I can remember realistically. But that isn't really the point. The point of the matter is that ever since Indira Gandhi came to power, almost ever since Indira Gandhi came to power, certainly since the 1971 election, the Congress party has been in the hands of the Nehru Gandhi family.
And without elections, even without eternal elections.
That you could not query their leadership, you could not, you had to be utterly loyal in the end to the family, or you were out. As far as the Sangh Parivar and the question of Vajpayee and Jaswant Singh, yes, of course, there have been occasions, but I would still say that there is a tremendous difference between the control that the Gandhi family exercised over the Congress party and the situation with the Sangh Parivar. And I'm not saying that Sangh Parivar has no influence or anything like that. It is a different situation.
But is there a conundrum for Modi as he begins putting together his government? He has been elected on development. I think Abhishek is right in saying that people have voted sometimes not even knowing or liking the BJP candidate because they wanted to see Modi as Prime Minister. The slogan has been development, but there will be influences in the larger Sangh Parivar who will want Hindutva to come into policy making. How do you see Mr. Modi navigating this?
Well, I think that this is going to be a difficult thing for him to navigate, definitely. But can I just say one thing about Modi before? I think it's, really a bit steep to say that Modi is, in a way, just an ordinary member of the party. I mean, when you're talking about elect a Modi government, not elect a BJP government, well, that spells it out very simply and straightforwardly. As for trying to balance, well, this is going to be a problem, because if the Sangh Parivar's influence becomes too obvious, that'll be a problem, because you'll have the dual loyalty issue. You'll go right back to where you were with the Janata Party. So that will be a problem. The other thing which will be a problem, I think, is that both within the country and internationally, if Hindutva becomes too much of an influence, or if Modi goes too far down the Hindutva road, this will cause a great deal of disquiet and alarm.
He's not likely to want to do it if you look at the focus of his campaign.
No, I don't think he is at the moment. No, not at all. I mean, I think that Modi has won this election on 2 words, really. Change. Everyone seems to want to change, and vikas, or development. And I think he will My
stick
own
to
view
those.
is he'll stick to that agenda. That's what got him there.
Let me take that back to Sudhanshu Trivedi. Sudhanshu, I think Sir Mark Tully is being fair that there is influence, but there are people who have said no. But there is really no point being politically correct about the fact that this is Ab Ki Baar Modi Sarkar. It's not Ab Ki Baar BJP Sarkar.
No, there was no point of discussing on that. If you remember, the last time in 2009,
Yes.
we were having Advani ji as the leader, and in every poster Advani ji was there. Majboot Neta Nirnayak Sarkar. And prior to that, we were having Atal ji's photo, Jancha Parkha Khara, and we used to say, Ab ki bari Atal Bihari. What is the difference between Ab ki bari Atal Bihari and Ab ki bar Modi Sarkar?
I think the
This is
difference. I think
it
the
is
difference
too much
is,
dissection.
No, but I think the difference is, and I've travelled also the last 2-3 months across different constituencies. Most people in so many seats, take Banaras for example. Most people told me if Joshi had been sent back, he would have lost. They were voting for Modi. They were not voting for the BJP candidate.
Obviously, we should not be shy of that the enormous popularity of Modi ji had become a carrier for all the BJP workers all over the country to galvanize this amount of support to BJP. On the other issue of that Parivar, I would like to say one more sentence. The difference between the Sangh Parivar in BJP and the Gandhi Parivar in Congress is like what is the difference between the mother and the master. The mother nurtures you to a situation and master addresses you. When mother says something, you feel exalted. When your master says something, you are forced to do that. So there is a difference between the two Parivars' entire process and their mode of inspiration or relation or whatever it is.
Okay, that's quite an analogy. So Abhishek Singhvi, you have to respond to that. The Gandhis is the master, the RSS is the mother. Though mothers can be strict as well, of course.
There are many differences. The mother can spank, scold, and perhaps control more easily and directly. She also has less formal power, but more de facto power. The guru, especially if it's a guru and not a master, who is installed in a formal position, does it openly through legitimacy, whether as president or office bearer, doesn't hide the authority he has. There are frequent periods when you are bereft of the guru. There may be other people, and you again have the guru back because you found his teachings as a pathfinder. You have to decide. One is ambiguous, anonymous, undeclared, but de facto. The other is declared official, and you can measure and hold accountable the exercise of power. Now, merely because you give adjectives that the one is a master and the other is mother, I don't think it changes the reality of the definition I've given.
Okay. Okay, last comments from that, Mark Tully, go ahead. Do you accept the analogy of the mother and the master?
Well, I'm not sure. I think one thing you have to say about mothers can be more authoritarian and more terrifying than masters sometimes. So I'm not sure that I would accept that.
Okay, so Sudhanshu Trivedi, come in on that. It's not like mothers cannot be, mothers can also be very, very strict.
Especially mother-in-laws.
Sudhanshu.
What are you saying? Pardon?
I said mothers can also be very strict, and mother-in-laws can be stricter is Mark Tully's
No,
position.
what I am saying, if mother becomes even strict, if says something, it is seen as for the good wishes of the child, it's not for the grabbing power. So it is not, you can say one word, in Hindi, I am not having the exact parallel in English, माता से पोषण मिलता है, शोषण नहीं मिलता. And your master can have your shoshan, but mother cannot have your shoshan. She can only provide poshan.
Okay. Mark Tully, last words to you as we start ending this discussion. What do you think will be, in a sense, Mr. Modi's priority? You said it's change and vikas. He will have to, in a sense, while not disassociating from the RSS, keep it at a distance.
Well, yes, I think so. But I think that let's think of his immediate priorities, leave the RSS out of it for a moment. I think really top priority, wherever I have been, and I haven't travelled extensively, particularly Mangai, inflation.
Inflation, yeah.
That's what people are really most angry about.
Yeah.
And I think his top priority should be that.
We leave it there. So Mark Tali, Abhishek Singhvi, Sudhanshu Trivedi. Sushma Swaraj, by the way, has just left the RSS headquarters. Those meetings to continue Mr. Modi's day in Delhi. Let's move on now to our big interview tonight. Speaking to me earlier, Uma Bharti at least was not coy at all in elaborating on the relationship between the RSS and the BJP. Also calling LK Advani somebody like the Himalayas, saying the party could not possibly offer a simple solution on what his next role should be. Uma ji, first of all, many congratulations to you. Like everybody else, you have delivered a very impressive victory. How do you see the outcome of this verdict? आप क्या मानती हैं ये एक विकास के लिए वोट है जिस तरह से मोदी जी ने कहा?
सबसे पहले तो मैं आपको धन्यवाद देती हूं बधाई देने के लिए, और दूसरा मेरा ये कहना है कि ये जो लोगों का जनादेश मिला है, ये जनादेश ऐसा मिला है कि हमारे सामने और मोदी जी के सामने देश की जनता का विकास करने के अलावा कोई विकल्प नहीं है। जो बाबा साहब अम्बेडकर ने कहा था संविधान सभा के कंक्लूजन के समय पर कि इसके पहले जो होता था उसके लिए हम अंग्रेजों को जिम्मेवार ठहराते थे, अब आज हमारा संविधान लागू हो जाएगा, अब जो देश में होगा उसकी जिम्मेवारी हमें लेनी पड़ेगी। मुझे लगता है मोदी जी को देश की जनता ने इतना बड़ा बहुमत दे दिया है कि अब हमारे सामने कोई विकल्प नहीं है सिवाय इसके कि हम लोगों को वो करके दिखाएं जो बातें हम करते थे।
उमा जी, इस नई सरकार का प्रायोरिटी, इस नई सरकार का फोकस क्या रहना चाहिए, क्या प्रायोरिटी होना चाहिए?
देखिए, नई सरकार की प्रायोरिटी क्या होनी चाहिए ये काम तो मेरा नहीं हो सकता है, क्योंकि मोदी जी को अच्छी तरह से मालूम है कि उनकी प्रायोरिटी क्या होंगी। लेकिन हाँ, जो देश की जनता के सामने उन्होंने विषय प्रस्तुत किया है, जिस गुड गवर्नेंस की बात उन्होंने कही है, और गुड गवर्नेंस में जिसको हिंदी में सुशासन कहते हैं जी, उसमें 3 चीजें होती हैं। एक डेवलपमेंट होता है, दूसरा करप्शन फ्री सिस्टम होता है, और तीसरा एक अच्छा लॉ एंड ऑर्डर होता है। और ये तीनों की जो पैकेजिंग होती है वो गुड गवर्नेंस होती है, और वो मोदी जी ने गुजरात में करके दिखाई, और आप ही लोगों के माध्यम से पूरी दुनिया को इसकी जानकारी हुई। मुझे लगता है यही गुड गवर्नेंस है। और इसके अलावा हमारी जो विदेश नीति है, हमारी जो सामरिक नीति है, और विश्व बाजार में हमारी जो आर्थिक नीति है, उसके बारे में भी लोगों की नजरें मोदी जी पे लगी हुई हैं। और अच्छी बात यह है कि पाकिस्तान और अमेरिका का भी मोदी जी के प्रति बहुत पॉजिटिव एटीट्यूड हुआ है।
जी जी, उमा जी,
कुल मिलाकर के ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे शक्तिशाली को सब नमस्कार करते हैं।
अच्छा, I want to share a statistic with you. This is highest number of women this time are going to be in the Lok Sabha. सबसे ज्यादा फीमेल रिप्रेजेंटेशन इस बारी होने जा रही है, उसमें से आप भी एक प्रोमिनेंट वुमेन लीडर रहेंगी। उमा जी, आपकी क्या भूमिका रहेगी? डू वी एक्सपेक्ट टू सी यू इन द न्यू गवर्नमेंट, कि आप संगठन में रहेंगी?
मेरे मन में गंगा बसी रहती है, और मोदी जी जब वाराणसी से लड़ने का फैसला किए, और आज भी जब उन्होंने गंगा आरती की, और जब उन्होंने घोषणा की कि उनको गंगा ने बुलाया है, तो मुझे तो कल जब उनको क्लियर मैंडेट मिल रहा था तो मुझे लग रहा था जैसे मेरा जीवन लक्ष्य पूरा हो गया हो। बल्कि एक घड़ी के लिए तो मुझे ये लगा कि अगर भगवान मुझसे पूछेंगे कि तुम मेरे पास वापस आना चाहोगी, तो शायद मैं कह दूंगी कि हाँ, क्योंकि हम सबकी मनोकामनाएं, हमारे सबकी आकांक्षाओं का जो रूप है वो अब हमको मोदी जी के रूप में दिखा है। इसलिए गंगा के कार्य में मेरा चित्त रहता है। दूसरा, गरीबों को 2 टाइम की रोटी मिले। झांसी, ललितपुर और बुंदेलखंड में बहुत गरीबी है, बहुत लोगों का पलायन हुआ है। दिल्ली में सबसे ज्यादा मजदूर बुंदेलखंड के हैं, उनको घर पे ही रह करके रोजगार मिले और रोटी मिले। और तीसरा, स्त्रियों के लिए मैं मानती हूँ कि पॉलिटिक्स में और नौकरियों में उनको कितना भी स्थान मिले, इसके अलावा भारत की स्त्री को आर्थिक तौर पर आजादी होनी चाहिए, फाइनेंशियल इंडिपेंडेंस भारत की स्त्री की होनी चाहिए। उसको पैसे के लिए पुरुष के सामने हाथ ना फैलाना पड़े।
बिल्कुल, लेकिन आपको हम सरकार में देखेंगे, कैबिनेट में देखेंगे, काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स में देखेंगे या नहीं?
ये फैसला तो मोदी जी को और पार्टी को करना है। मैं तो इस विषय पे सोचती ही नहीं हूँ।
आपकी अपनी,
मैं केंद्र में मंत्री भी रही हूँ, मैं मुख्यमंत्री भी रही हूँ, मैं सांसद भी रही हूँ। मैं तो जो भी जहाँ भी रहती हूँ मैं कोशिश करती हूँ गरीब के आंसू पोंछूं, स्त्री के सम्मान के साथ में कोई समझौता नहीं कर पाती हूँ। तो इसलिए मैं अपने बारे में बिल्कुल नहीं बोल सकती। आप यकीन करो, आपको पता है मैं विनम्र मानी भी नहीं जाती हूँ, तो मैं विनम्रता के प्रदर्शन के लिए नहीं बोल रही। आई एम नॉट बीइंग पोलाइट, आई एम नॉट टू बी पोलाइट।
बट यू मस्ट हैव अ प्रेफरेंस उमा जी, सबकी प्रेफरेंस होती है। कुछ लोग संगठन में पोस्ट चाहते हैं, ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल पोस्ट चाहते हैं, कुछ लोग को एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव एक्सपीरियंस है, जैसे आपने कहा आप चीफ मिनिस्टर भी रह चुकी हैं। व्हाट वुड यू प्रेफर?
आप मेरे यकीन करना, कल जब मोदी जी को क्लियर मेजोरिटी मिली तो मुझे ऐसे लगा कि जैसे हम सब मोदी में समा गए हैं। जैसे अलग अलग ट्रिब्यूटरी रिवर्स जो होती हैं वो मेन रिवर स्ट्रीम में जब आ जाती हैं तो हमें लगा कि जैसे मोदी जी जो करेंगे वो हम सब ही कर रहे हैं, और इसलिए मैं कल से एकदम संतुष्ट सी हूँ। आई एम वेरी हैप्पी।
अच्छा,
तो मैं अपने आप में बहुत खुश हूँ अभी।
अच्छा, मुझे आप ये बताएं कि आरएसएस के बारे में जब बीजेपी से पूछा जाता है तो वो कहते हैं हमारा आइडियोलॉजिकल गाइड है, कुछ लोग कहते हैं ये कल्चरल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, राजनीति पर उनका कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं है। लेकिन हम पिछले 2-3 दिन से देख रहे हैं आरएसएस की सभी सीनियर लीडर्स और बीजेपी की भी कई लीडर्स आपस में मिल बैठ रहे हैं। आप भी आज आरएसएस की लीडरशिप से मिली। आरएसएस का क्या रोल रहेगा अगली सरकार और अगली कैबिनेट के फॉर्मेशन में?
इसको स्वीकार करने में कोई संकोच और गुरेज नहीं होना चाहिए कि आरएसएस हमारा नीति निर्देशक है, और वो जो नीतियां हमें हमारे रक्त में घुल मिल जाती हैं, उन्होंने जो बातें कही हैं, इसलिए उन्हें बार बार हमें रिमाइंड भी नहीं कराना पड़ता। हमें ध्यान रहता है कि हमारी मर्यादाएं क्या, हमारी लिमिट क्या है। दूसरा, आपके माध्यम से पूरे देशवासियों को मैं बताना चाहती हूँ कि मोदी जी संघ के प्रचारक रहे हैं, खाली संघ के स्वयंसेवक नहीं रहे हैं। और उन्होंने जो एक अच्छी जीवन शैली जो उनकी है और इतनी मेहनत करने के बाद में भी वो जो स्वस्थ रहते हैं, उसका कारण है कि वो संघ के प्रचारक रहे हैं। उनकी एक बहुत अच्छी दिनचर्या रही है और उनका जो निजी जीवन भी बहुत साफ सुथरा रहा है, उसका कारण संघ का प्रचारक होना रहा है। तो ये तो सच्चाई है कि संघ के स्वयंसेवकों ने अभी बहुत डट के काम किया है। लेकिन ये भी एक सच्चाई है कि संघ के लोग डे टू डे बेसिस पर भारतीय जनता पार्टी को डिस्टर्ब नहीं करते। जो बाहर बातें आती हैं, जैसे मैं आज संघ कार्यालय गई तो मैं कोई बीजेपी डिस्कस करने के लिए नहीं गई। हमारे कई वरिष्ठ प्रचारक हैं जिनको मैं बहुत मानती हूँ, और सब लोग बहुत चिंतित थे जब मैं झांसी से चुनाव लड़ रही थी कि मेरा स्वास्थ्य ठीक है कि नहीं। तो मैं सिर्फ उनको मिलने के लिए गई और दिखाने के लिए गई कि मैं प्रसन्न हूँ और मैं स्वस्थ हूँ। तो हर चीज में वो लोग नहीं टोकते, लेकिन ये सच्चाई है कि उन्होंने तो हमारे खून में ही वो चीजें मिला दी हैं जिनसे कि हमें अपना जीवन चलाना है, तो रोज उन्हें टोकने की जरूरत भी नहीं पड़ती है।
लेकिन जो लोग कहते हैं और कांग्रेस के कई नेता कहते हैं कि आप लोग हमारे बारे में कहते हैं कि हमारा रिमोट कंट्रोल 10 जनपद से चलता है, तो बीजेपी का रिमोट कंट्रोल नागपुर से चलता है।
नहीं, रिमोट कंट्रोल की जरूरत ही नहीं है। हम सेल्फ कंट्रोल में ही उनके द्वारा आ गए हैं। वो जो सोचते हैं वैसा हम सोचने लगे हैं, तो इसलिए रिमोट कंट्रोल की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती है। और अब तो देशवासियों ने उस पर मुहर लगा दी है। संघ का एक स्वयंसेवक जो कि प्रचारक भी रहा है, आज वो देश का प्रधानमंत्री बनने जा रहा है। इसलिए कम से कम अब तो कांग्रेस के लोग और हमारे वामपंथी आलोचक वो नतमस्तक होकर के लोगों के जनादेश को स्वीकार कर ले। लोगों ने ही हमारी आइडियोलॉजी को एक्सेप्ट कर लिया है।
पर आप मानती हैं कि कुछ लोगों को लगता है कि मोदी जी का फोकस विकास पर रहना चाहिए, हिंदुत्व जैसे मुद्दे नहीं उठाने चाहिए। मुझे याद है आपने मुझे एक बारी कहा हिंदुत्व इज द प्राण ऑफ इंडिया, आपने मुझे बोला था। तो लेकिन मोदी जी विकास पर फोकस करना चाहते हैं, तो जो आरएसएस की बिलीफ है एक हिंदुत्व में, वो कैसे इस नई सरकार की पॉलिसीज में क्या जगह पाएगी?
हिंदुत्व तो प्राण है ही भारत का। वो ऐसा नहीं कि मैंने कल कहा था और आज नहीं कहूंगी, लेकिन प्राण तो अपनी जगह पर स्थिर रहता है। जो ध्यान रखना पड़ता है, जो चीजों की मेंटेनेंस करनी पड़ती है, वो हाथ हैं, पांव हैं, आंखें हैं, यानी डेवलपमेंट है। हिंदुत्व तो भारत की प्राण शक्ति है, प्राण वायु है, और हिंदुत्व के कारण ही भारत ने सेक्युलर होने का डिसीजन लिया। क्योंकि हिंदुइज्म का मतलब है कि हम सब पूजा विधियों को मानते हैं। एकम सद विप्रा बहुधा वदन्ति, सत्य एक है और अनेकों प्रकार से बोला जाता है। ये हमको हिंदुत्व ने उपदेश दिया है। तो ये देश सेक्युलर इसलिए है क्योंकि इस देश की प्राण शक्ति हिंदुत्व है। लेकिन हिंदुत्व और डेवलपमेंट एक दूसरे के विरोधी हैं। ये जो सोच है ये बहुत संकीर्ण सोच है। एक अच्छी नमाज पढ़ने वाला मुसलमान अगर अच्छा मिनिस्टर हो सकता है, तो हिंदुत्व पर आस्था रखने वाला व्यक्ति अच्छा प्राइम मिनिस्टर भी हो सकता है। हम ऐसा क्यों मानते हैं कि जो हिंदुत्व पर आस्था रखेगा वो अच्छी गवर्नेंस नहीं दे सकता? ये ऐसा सोचना ही गलत है। बीमार मन है ये, बीमार मन के लोग ऐसा सोचते हैं।
लेकिन उमा जी, आज के दौर में जो लोकसभा में मुस्लिम रिप्रेजेंटेशन है, इट्स द लोएस्ट इन 50 इयर्स। पार्टी को आप मानेंगे एक खास अटेम्प्ट करना पड़ेगा टू रीच आउट टू द मुस्लिम्स, और जब वो आपको सुनते हैं सेइंग हिंदुत्व इज द प्राण ऑफ इंडिया, हो सकता है कि उनकी वल्नरेबिलिटीज इंक्रीज हो जाए।
नहीं, मुझे क्या लग रहा है कि जो मोदी ने कहा बिल्कुल ठीक कहा कि हम कि कोई बहुत गरीब है तो उसकी रोटी का ध्यान रखें, बीमार है तो दवाई का ध्यान रखें, किसी की बेइज्जती करके उसको थाने में बिठाया गया है तो उसके साथ अन्याय ना हो, हम इसका ध्यान रखें। हम धर्म के आधार पर अगर हम किसी को विशेष रूप से खुश करने की कोशिश करेंगे तो हम मुसलमानों का नुकसान ही करेंगे
जी।
और इसी वजह से वो आइसोलेटेड होंगे। इसलिए हमें तो ये ध्यान रखना है कि जो गरीब है, और इसमें सत्यता यह है कि मुस्लिम परसेंट 95% गरीब है
जी।
बल्कि मेरे को लगता है मैं 5% भी कुछ ज्यादा ही बोल रही हूँ
जी।
गरीब हैं, अशिक्षित हैं, बहुत परेशान हैं और अपनी जिंदगी में बहुत सारी चीजों से वंचित हैं, अपने ह्यूमन राइट से डिप्राइव्ड हैं। और हम इन चीजों का ध्यान रखते हैं और मोदी जी ने गुजरात में इन चीजों का ध्यान रखा है और मुझे लगता है कि भारत का मुसलमान पहली बार सुखी और निश्चिंत होकर के रहेगा मोदी जी के प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद, क्योंकि गुजरात की रिपोर्ट यही कह रही है कि गुजरात का मुसलमान सबसे सुखी है। तो अब मोदी जी देश के प्रधानमंत्री बनेंगे तो हिंदुस्तान का मुसलमान भी दुनिया का सबसे सुखी मुसलमान साबित होगा।
चलिए वो तो आगे देखेंगे क्या होता है। एक आखिरी सवाल आप अडवाणी जी से भी मिली, अडवाणी जी की क्या एक तरह से क्या रोल रहेगा? बात चल रही है कि वो शायद स्पीकर का पोस्ट में आए, कोई कह रहे हैं कि 2 साल बाद प्रेसिडेंट बन सकते हैं। उनके मन में क्या है, जरा हमें बताएं।
अडवाणी जी तो हिमालय के जैसे हैं। हिमालय हमेशा भव्य होता है, सुंदर होता है और गरिमापूर्ण होता है। ही इज वेरी ग्रेसफुल, ही इज वेरी एलिगेंट।
व्हाट रोल डू यू थिंक ही शुड गेट?
ही हैज गॉट अ मैग्नीट्यूड।
व्हाट रोल?
और उनकी स्टेट्समैनशिप है, वो मैं नहीं सोच सकती, बल्कि वो हमारा रोल तय कर रहे हैं, वो हम सबका रोल तय कर रहे हैं, वो मोदी जी का रोल तय कर रहे हैं, वो मोदी जी को आशीर्वाद दे रहे हैं। जो व्यक्ति हिमालय की तरह बड़ा हो, हम उसके बारे में ये कैसे सोच सकते हैं कि उसको क्या करना है? ये तो उसको हमें बताना कि हम लोग क्या करें। इसलिए मेरी तो अडवाणी जी से, मैं उनकी बेटी जैसी हूँ, जैसी प्रतिभा है वैसी हूँ। मिलने गई हूँ जीतने के बाद उनका आशीर्वाद देने के लिए।
Okay. Uma ji, thank you so much for talking to us and congratulations again for your own win in Jhansi. Good evening, you're watching an extended edition of the Buck Stops here this Sunday evening and I'm Barkha Dutt. Let's get started with our top story this evening. Narendra Modi is in Delhi. He spent the day in marathon meetings as he begins the process of putting together his cabinet. You can see there in those pictures Modi meeting with Advani. In fact, he spent much of the day meeting with leaders who have not been close to him. Advani and him have had, of course, friction, open friction, as have there have been differences between him and Murli Manohar Joshi. And Narendra Modi also met with Murli Manohar Joshi. He has not yet met with Sushma Swaraj. But BJP leaders have also spent the day meeting with RSS representatives. Sushma Swaraj was among those to leave the RSS headquarters in Delhi earlier this evening. Other leaders as well. Everybody, in fact, Amit Shah, the party president, Rajnath Singh, Nitin Gadkari, Venkaiah Naidu, Uma Bharti, they've all been meeting with the RSS. Uma Bharti in an interview to me saying the RSS is in the blood of the BJP. And don't forget that Mr. Modi is not just a Swayam Sevak, he's an RSS Pracharak. Let's go straight to my colleague Rahul Srivastav. He's been tracking these meetings. Rahul, every single BJP leader of consequence has gone on record to say the RSS will not play a role in cabinet formation. That begs the question, what's going on in all these meetings?
Barkha, if you look at the pattern of the meetings, one clear picture is emerging, is that all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are lying scattered. But and the picture might become clearer, but there are two clear power centers emerging. Ignore the denials by BJP and RSS people that the RSS is not going to play any role. The meetings have been between Narendra Modi and others, and RSS leaders and the others. There has been a flurry of activity of BJP leaders going to the RSS headquarters in Delhi at the Keshav Kunj office, primarily because of the fact that General Secretary Mr. Bhaiyaji Joshi, he is a virtual second in command, is leaving Delhi tomorrow. Mr. Bhagwat is not in Delhi, so perhaps almost everybody wanted to mark their presence and sound out their side of the story as far as the cabinet formation or the next dispensation is concerned.
Rahul, let me ask you, the meeting that's just taken place now, Sushma Swaraj. Now that's a really interesting meeting because in the past, it's not as if Sushma Swaraj has been seen as somebody close to the RSS, not traditionally at least. And yet, as of now, Mr. Modi has not met with her. There have been reports that she's not been that happy. She's been extremely low-key through this entire campaign.
Yes, Barkha, that's what the crisis is. That one set of people are going to Mr. Modi and the RSS because they want a place in the new dispensation led by Mr. Narendra Modi. Then there is another set of people who are trying to find their space in the new dispensation. What will happen to them? And that includes L.K. Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi and Sushma Swaraj primarily. Primarily, what we are hearing is that these leaders have talked to the RSS and told them which way do they want to go. Though there is no clarity on it, but one faction says that Sushma Swaraj wants one of the key portfolios, one of the top big four. The other faction is saying that Sushma Swaraj wants to perhaps stay away from the cabinet, does not want to become answerable to Narendra Modi, and she may be looking at perhaps one party position or also even a post like speaker. Again, that's one thing which sources are saying, and indications are coming that that's what L.K. Advani also wants, that he does not want to become a part of the cabinet or council of ministers because he's senior to Mr. Narendra Modi. That's a certainty. And that's why a speaker's portfolio actually keeps him insulated from the portfolio, the protocol enjoyed by the Prime Minister. So rest of the elements I think can be easily worked out because Narendra Modi will largely pick and choose who he wants, or the RSS and the BJP will sit down together to decide which region, which caste and which member of parliament needs to get what kind of portfolio. Okay. One factor, Barkha, last I want to mention, Rajnath Singh and Nitin Gadkari, two crucial elements because they are close to the RSS. Will they stay out or will they go into the cabinet as largely the RSS's nominee into the cabinet to perhaps carry out or ensure that what the RSS wants happens as far as the Narendra Modi-led government is concerned.
Very interesting for Mr. Modi to navigate this relationship with the RSS. Perhaps, of course, can't disassociate it, but how much of a distance will he manage to keep from it? Rahul Srivastava, thanks very much. Now, what is interesting is as the BJP plans its future, the Congress is weighing its past. Tomorrow is a crucial meeting of the Congress Working Committee. Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi are expected to offer resignations from their party posts. The party is likely to say, no, please don't do this. Kamal Nath, however, now the senior most member of parliament across parties, by the way, in an interview to me, has given a call for immediate internal elections to end what he calls the culture of patronage. If you had to recommend one surgical solution, because sometimes you need surgery to heal things, what would it be for the Congress party?
I think we should have a working committee which is elected, and Rahul Gandhi has been saying this for the last 2 years, that we should have a working committee which is elected. And all those who, to protect themselves, oppose this are causing immense damage. I completely agree with Mr. Rahul Gandhi. We should have an elected working committee. Then this culture of people, who are being bestowed with patronage is going to end.
All right, that interview with Kamal Nath is coming up later in the program at about 9:30 or 9:35. Let's get straight now to our debate on the program this evening. In a special series, we've been looking ahead at what a Modi Sarkar might look like. Last night, we discussed its economic mantra. Today, we want to look at Narendra Modi and the world. With this decisive mandate, can he afford more imagination in his foreign policy? From the rhetoric of the election campaign to the pragmatism of actually running a government, what will possibly this government's foreign policy look like? Will it mark a significant departure from the UPA foreign policy, or will it more or less continue along the same track? Joining me now, two very interesting guests because both are actually diplomat turned politicians. We're joined first by Shashi Tharoor. He's of course one of the few Congress leaders to have won his election, and he's had a long innings as a diplomat before he got into active politics. And also with me here in the studio is Hardeep Puri. We've of course known him formerly as the permanent representative to the United Nations. He's now a formal member of the BJP. And with me in the studio as well, Gardner Harris from the New York Times, Jason Burke from The Guardian. Before I begin our discussion tonight, what's very interesting and what is a relationship that will be really closely watched is of course India's relationship with Pakistan now. Narendra Modi has been hawkish, some would say hard, some would say tough on Pakistan in the campaign. But when I asked his close confidant Amit Shah whether the Pakistan policy would be radically different from that of the UPA, this is what he said. Looking ahead, आज दुनिया भर के लीडर्स ने नरेंद्र मोदी जी को बधाई देने के लिए फोन किया. पाकिस्तान से भी फोन आया, नवाज शरीफ का फोन आया, उन्होंने तो न्योता भी दे दिया कि मोदी जी पाकिस्तान आए. अब आप ऑपोजिशन में नहीं, अब आप सरकार बनाने जा रहे हैं, ये बहुत डेलिकेट इश्यूज हो जाते हैं. तो इसको लेकर क्या सोच है कि क्या एक नेबरहुड पॉलिसी रहेगी बीजेपी की?
देखिए, देश की विदेश नीति सातत्यपूर्ण होनी चाहिए, ऐसा मेरी पार्टी मानती है. सरकारें बदलने के साथ देश की विदेश नीति में कोई भारी नीतिगत बदलाव नहीं होता. मगर इतना निश्चित होगा कि देश की विदेश नीति की दो बुनियादें हम जरूर स्ट्रेंथी करना चाहेंगे, देश का सम्मान और देश की सुरक्षा। इसके आधार पर ही देश की विदेश नीति में जो थोड़े बहुत बदलाव करने की जरूरत है वो होगी।
So while the honor of the country and the security of the country will be two cornerstones of India's foreign policy, says Amit Shah, he also says governments may change, but foreign policy doesn't change that much. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Mr. Modi, with really such a decisive mandate, can maneuver his foreign policy into a more imaginative direction than Manmohan Singh was able to do. Let's start straight away with our panel. I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Hardeep Puri. Do you believe what Amit Shah is saying is largely correct, that India's foreign policy does not dramatically change with a change in government? That, for example, would not be true of the United States or the United Kingdom.
Well, look, when you talk of foreign policy, you have to be clear that you don't set the agenda. The agenda has already been set because you have to interact with your neighbors in the first context, with Pakistan and other global powers like the United States and China. Now, clearly, foreign policy does not follow zigzags. There is an essential continuity.
Yeah.
But here what Mr. Amit Shah said, he said that this, and he implied that this would be a foreign policy anchored in security.
Yeah, honor and security.
Honor and security.
Yeah.
Now, what do those two concepts or terms mean in relationship with Pakistan?
Yeah.
That this model which we have followed so far, that is, you go on bleeding even whilst Pakistan is not being able to rein in the terror machine, and they continue to be unsuccessful on that score, and we continue to harbor the prospect of summit level talks. So what I'm saying is that talks with Pakistan can continue, but I think Pakistan, we will need to have a very serious discussion with them on what the pending items are. Bringing the perpetrators of the Bombay terror attacks to justice, giving us absolute assurance that their soil will not be used, and especially state agencies like the ISI will not be used to facilitate, if not directly organize attacks against Indian interests.
Yet may I ask you, before I take this to Mr. Tharoor, Nawaz Sharif was among the world leaders who made a congratulatory call to Mr. Modi. He even invited him. In the past, in Vajpayee's government, you saw Mr. Vajpayee making 2 trips to Pakistan. Manmohan Singh seemed to be much softer on Pakistan, wasn't empowered by his party to even make one. There is a suggestion, and this suggestion I even heard on my reporting trips to Pakistan, that when you have a right of centre government in power in India, prospects for peace increase. Similarly to people saying that when you have the army in power in Pakistan, prospects for peace increase.
Yeah, there's several elements in what you say. Number one, this whole issue of the telephone call.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been surprised if the telephone call hadn't come.
Yeah.
So let's put that aside.
Yeah.
Secondly, an invitation, fine.
Yeah.
Mr. Vajpayee went twice. With the benefit of hindsight, I don't think I would feel confident in saying that those kinds of visits should be undertaken unless the preparatory work has been done by the officials and others, and we are ready to get an agreement at summit level. Dr. Manmohan Singh, yes, I think this will be one of his regrets that he was not able to visit his village.
Yeah.
And if I'm asked, I think I don't see Narendra Modi as Prime Minister of India wanting to visit Pakistan unless some of these substantive issues are addressed and we have assurance, and which means not rhetoric, words,
yes,
but we have concrete evidence that the terror machine there has been either severely circumscribed or eliminated altogether.
All right, Shashi Tharoor, let's bring you in here. It's Manmohan Singh was seen to be very soft on Pakistan by his own party often. Yet, when he met with Nawaz Sharif in New York on the sidelines of that United Nations General Assembly meeting, it was a meeting that took place in the backdrop of a terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir. For all of Manmohan Singh's initiatives with Pakistan, he was never able to go to Pakistan because his party, your party, actually did not empower him to craft his own Pakistan policy. Do you see Mr. Modi as being able to be more autonomous with his foreign policy than Dr. Manmohan Singh was able to be?
No, first of all, I think that's rather simplistic, Barkha. Let me start off by agreeing with Amit Shah and Hardeep Puri that in our country, traditionally, political differences stop at the water's edge. Foreign policy is India's foreign policy. not the foreign policy of any particular party. But that's why I want to stress that literally everything Hardeep has said about Pakistan policy has been our policy, and that's why the Prime Minister hasn't gone. We too are concerned about the honour and security of India. We too have demanded concrete evidence that the terror machine has been dismantled and that concrete action is being taken against the perpetrators of 26/11 and those backing them. And in the absence of that, the Prime Minister chose not to go. I think it's wrong to see it in terms of the party not empowering him to go. It is a national decision. The Foreign Ministry had a part in it. Political considerations had a part in it. But the Prime Minister himself chose not to go for the very same reasons that Hardeep Puri is advancing today. That just to have an appearance of theatrical bonhomie when the substantive concerns we have as a nation have not been addressed would simply have been doing a disservice to the Indian people. The Prime Minister certainly would have wished to go. The Prime Minister would have liked to see peace dawning on the subcontinent. We have always argued that peace with Pakistan is in our interest as well. It's not a question of being soft on Pakistan. It's a question of realizing that a country like us, focused on our economic growth, doesn't want a troubled border or a troubled neighborhood, doesn't want to be a war zone. So our only concern has been exactly the same concern that the BJP spokesman has mentioned.
But
Let me simply add that in the election we've heard a lot of rather extravagant rhetoric.
Yes.
And our only concern would be that there should be no hasty actions in the event of any events on the border, for example, that would differ from the prudent and sensible and measured response of the government of India in the last 10 years.
Okay, that's an important point, and I should get Ambassador Puri to come in there, and then I'll come to you, Gardiner and Jason. That Manmohan Singh's government reflected a more restrained policy to cross-border conflagrations, to even the beheading at the line of control. That the rhetoric of an election campaign is very different from the real concerns and the sensitivities of running a government.
I want to start by congratulating my friend Shashi. And I think he's choosing to put a gloss on this. What we witnessed vis-a-vis Pakistan is not restraint. What we've witnessed is waffle. I mean, there's been confusion, hesitation, strategic disarray in our discussions with Pakistan. It has taken us 10 years. I know we made mistakes in the past, the NDA government. I'm not one who's going to justify those. But look, we need to sit down with the Pakistanis and tell them, are you in a position to rein in the ISI or not? Because are you in a position to join us in a zero tolerance on terrorism or not? Now, when it comes to responses as a government, first of all, I think this mandate, and this is a question you put to Shashi, and I think I should be, for the sake of record, be responding to it. This mandate which Mr. Modi has received gives him the authority and the flexibility to recraft some of our more important relationships. And I have absolutely no doubt that with Pakistan, you will see a recalibration of the relationship. The objectives of India will always remain the same. We want friendship with Pakistan. We want peace and security. We want a stable Pakistan. But that cannot be at the expense of us being subjected to the kind of conduct which we have been receiving from Pakistan and elements within Pakistan. Therefore, even as we now leave the rhetoric of the elections behind us, you will see in the next few days, I have no doubt that we are going to be tested by Pakistan. And I think Pakistan should give it a good and very deep thought as to how a Modi government would react as against a Manmohan government. The attack on our embassy in Kabul, when there was overwhelming evidence that the ISI and the Haqqani network were involved, when the deputy head of the CIA flew all the way to Islamabad, but the attack took place before that, God forbid, should any attempt at destabilization of that kind take place, I would not place my bets, if I were a betting man, on restraint.
So there
will be a response, and there will be a decisive response.
And you're suggesting you're expecting trouble?
Well, look, I'm a professional diplomat. I have served in the Indian Foreign Service for 39 years, and for another year on the sidelines. Let us see what Pakistani attitudes are. I welcome expressions of friendship. I welcome invitations. But I would like to see some concrete evidence. 2 Indian journalists were thrown out the other day, and what I'm hearing on the grapevine, etc., well, you will be tested. Let's see how you respond. It'll be the same again. I don't want to anticipate what is going to happen in terms of an action from Pakistan. What I can tell you, the response will not be the same.
I will take it to Shashi in just a moment, but Gardiner and Jason, Gardiner, let me start with you. You heard Shashi Tharoor saying that political differences stop at the edge of India's voters. For the world looking in at this mandate, is that the assessment, or is there a feeling that this could be a different foreign policy?
Look, I think one of the interesting things would be how are they going to apply honor and security to China? Of course, you know, Modi has gone several times to China. He has a great, right, he's got a great interest in China. On the other hand, one would expect him to perhaps have a different response if troops from China again camp out in Kashmir. So I think one of the most interesting, clearly...
Or Arunachal, for that matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Clearly, the Modi government is going to be a little bit faster on the trigger with Pakistan, although, you know, the bellicose rhetoric over here is not going to help him get jobs. His job, number one job as Modi, is to find jobs for the huge number of people who are coming of age right now. Talking about Pakistan in a bellicose way is not going to do that.
Okay.
So
we're not discussing economic policy. I would have told you the major priority is to get the economy started. We're discussing foreign policy. But to say,
economic policy is first. And I think that is going to
be economic policy is
ultimately linked. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? That's the point.
Okay, Jason, come in on that.
I think looking from outside now at the Modi government, what people are interested in is exactly this push on development, push on the economy, because that's an opportunity for
But why would you link that to Ambassador Puri's comments on Pakistan?
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Because you could very easily derail. This is what the point Gardner's making.
Exactly. You have multinational corporations who do not want to come in here if people are going to be starting talking about doing little border wars with Pakistan.
No, but nobody's having a border war. The question is what would happen.
I was very interested about what you're talking about Pakistan, because I think it is, like Gardner, I think it is problematic in that you were talking about how you're going to threaten the Pakistanis. But
we are not threatening the Pakistanis. We would want
good relations.
How you get them to behave.
If there is an actual conflagration at the line of control again.
Your options are actually quite limited, because the problem is that, as you well know, the problem with dealing with Pakistan is that the people you're talking to, and you made the point, you're going to say to the Pakistanis, can you rein in the ISI? And the answer quite obviously is no. So
well, the ISI is the Pakistani army.
Yes, of course, but you're not talking to the Pakistani army, are you? You're talking to the Pakistani civilian leadership.
So what you're implying is that...
Let me finish. So what do you then do? That's my question. How do you threaten the civilian leadership if they're not powerful enough to do so?
Okay. As we park that question, just want to bring in Shashi here. Shashi, you know, the fact of the matter is that foreign policy has to take ingredients of public opinion. Has to factor in public opinion. And the UPA had to contend with this as well, that what Jason and Gardiner may find bellicose when Hardeep Puri makes that argument, a number of Indians may actually agree with it. You've got to factor that in, that foreign policy cannot depart dramatically from how people are feeling.
But that's precisely the point, Barkha. We had an overriding vision that our foreign policy had to serve the interests of our economic development, of the transformation of India, the abolition of our poverty, through investment and growth. And we knew we had to get that investment from abroad, and we knew we couldn't get investment from abroad if our country was a war zone with troubled borders. So we went out of our way to ensure tranquility on our borders and to promote good relations with Bangladesh, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan, with Nepal, and so on. What worries me about Hardeep's language, and I say this with the greatest of respect for the very strong positions publicly taken by the BJP, is precisely that we don't want the government of India to paint itself in a corner, that the next incident of an Indian patrol being ambushed or an Indian soldier being beheaded results in bombing and worse, and there is a response, and then Pakistani opinion gathers behind the flag there, and we suddenly find ourselves escalating into a war that drives investors away from India and that sets back our economic development by a decade. That's the kind of thing we need to avoid, and we really have to be sensible as a government in not conveying that kind of threat, because if we fulfill that threat, we'll only be shooting ourselves in the foot, quite literally.
Okay.
Look, if the argument is that in the interest of economic development, we have to do everything possible to create a conducive climate for foreign direct investment, to reassure investors, I'm with you on that. And there can be no doubt on that. But if the issue is that if we know that the Pakistani state is complicit in acts of terror against India, then should we be talking to the Pakistanis? That is the issue.
The question
we
is,
need to defend us.
what
Oh
are
yes,
our options?
there are a range of options. There are a range of options. You can, and this is not the time to spell them out, and I wouldn't want to spell them out through a TV discussion in any case. But look, my own expectation is that when the Pakistanis see that you have a government in India with the BJP itself commanding a majority, that they will make that extra effort. And that is the sense of my message, that we should not reach the stage where there is an attempt to provoke. That is my point.
Do you agree with Gardner's description that a BJP foreign policy will be quicker on the trigger?
Well, I don't, this trigger cowboy language, I'm always a little more careful in choosing my words. All I want to tell you is that the BJP's foreign policy will of necessity have to be anchored in national security. We will go the extra mile with Pakistan to tell them to seriously introspect. We will want to bilaterally discuss this with them. I said not at summit level. Please be careful. We are not closing channels. There is no bellicosity here. The channels of communication are open. We will make the extra effort. But the argument cannot be that in the interest of economic development, you allow yourself to be subjected to the kind of treatment we were being meted out by Pakistan. That is my point.
Maybe we should focus from the neighborhood to the west, because that's an important equation. It's had its share of terrible friction in the past. The visa issue with the United States of America is now a non-issue.
It was a non-issue even then. When the visa was denied, no attempt was made by either the BJP or Mr. Modi, some loose cannons and articulations notwithstanding by irresponsible people. The visa has never been an issue. Number one, Mr. Modi today is the Prime Minister of India.
Of course.
All right, let's be very clear. There are more substantive issues involved. It's a $100 billion relationship in terms of flow of goods and services. It is the world's leading power. It is a power with which we share a value system. It is a country with which we want to partner in order for mutual benefit. So there's no issue there. But the relationship is in a state of disrepair. It is supposed to be a strategic partnership. It looks very transactional to me. I've said that on a number of times. I think, and the blame for that in the last 10 years must be equally apportioned to Delhi and Washington.
I will take that to Mr. Tharoor, but Cameron makes the call, Obama makes the call, those calls have to come. And I think even Hardeep is right in saying even Nawaz Sharif had to make the call. But the United States-India relationship, it seems to have, for lack of a better word, lapsed.
Absolutely, but I think that's in part because it's been run by the diplomats and it hasn't really been run by the politicians. And the hope is, and that's very bizarre, obviously. Manmohan Singh's greatest accomplishment, he said, was this U.S. relationship. And then he allowed it to sort of get pissed away because the Americans made a mistake and arrested a diplomat. No doubt that there were some problems there. But this is a relationship, it's a $100 billion relationship. India gets $24 billion in additional money out of that relationship. The balance of payment goes towards India way. The United States sends 1 million tourists here, more than any other country in the world.
And you're saying Devyani Khobragade was really not reason enough to jeopardize it.
How can you be so stupid as to sort of jeopardize this most important relationship?
I must have Shashi come in there, and then I'll come to Jason. Shashi, go ahead.
We didn't jeopardize a relationship. They did by allowing a diplomat to be arrested and humiliated in this way. Let me stress very clearly, no friendly country will arrest the diplomat of another friendly country, strip search her and cavity search her, as was done. It is an extremely unacceptable act. And let me also add that there are even spies who are caught and are merely quietly given 24 hours to leave the country. Doing this was totally beyond the pale. And therefore, it is absurd to put the onus on India for what was in fact a very sensible reaction. All we did was to give American diplomats in India the same kind of treatment and parity that Indian diplomats in America are routinely getting. And that's all.
We didn't strip search anyone. No, we didn't strip search anyone.
That in any way would
it is proof of my point that he continues to talk about this. This has been months and months and months of grinding away. They've just kicked out, by the way, all the executives from the American club here. They were mad at the American diplomats. Now they're taking it out on the people who actually employ more than 500,000 Indians in New Delhi. The separation between the diplomatic efforts of India and the economic needs of India have never been more stark than in these last few months with the United States. It is stupid. I'm sorry to say.
I didn't
sir.
say this. Shashi said it.
Yeah, it's just
It's his
incredibly
government which
stupid.
did it.
And one hopes,
I think Shashi's wanting to say something.
and one hopes
I
that
think
the
Shashi Tharoor is
politicians will eventually put a leash on
Sorry,
them.
Jason, but I think Shashi Tharoor is wanting to say something. Go ahead, Mr. Tharoor.
Now, I was just trying to say that I was not aware of people in the unconnected to diplomacy who employ Indians being expelled. That is something that is news to me. I've not been in the foreign ministry for quite some time, so it's possible that when the new dispensation reviews this file, this is something they should look at. But let me stress,
Okay, Jason, come in.
to my knowledge, the official decisions taken on this matter at a time when I was being briefed on it systematically as a spokesman of the party and the government on this question, stopped at these very technical administrative measures, and there was no intent to jeopardize the overall relationship. If matters have gone beyond the point that I was aware of, then I would not disagree with the journalist who says it's foolish. We have no desire to jeopardize the overall relationship, but we do want to send a very strong signal that the action of a friendly government in treating a representative of India in an unfriendly way will not be tolerated. And I don't think the BJP, which talks about India's honor, would have behaved any differently.
Okay, Jason.
I think it's quite interesting that the discussion so far has been about Copra Gade and about Pakistan, and that the framing is a lot about Indian honor. And that kind of very great sensitivity to being taken seriously. And I think that's important.
But why is that wrong?
It's not wrong at all. It's absolutely justified. And I think what's interesting now is I think there's an opportunity to move relationships with the US, with Europe, into a different area, an area which, and China as well, possibly even Pakistan, an area which is much more pragmatic, tries to move away. This is a very clean break. I mean, in terms of India's post-colonial history, in terms of India's electoral landscape, in terms of its social landscape and all the rest of it. This is an opportunity to move things, to reset, to reboot on a whole range of fronts, and in a very pragmatic way where you establish much healthier relationships with the US without going on and on about reciprocity. You're not going to have reciprocity with the US. Nobody has reciprocity with the US. How can you get reciprocal with someone who's much bigger and much more powerful? That goes for European countries, that goes for India, that goes for anybody. You can move to what you can gain, what they can gain. You can do it with
more
Pakistan.
transactional?
Yeah, keep it
Or more
transactional.
utilitarian?
Transactional, rational, pragmatic, and that
Not
is something
emotional.
But is there any
is an
country in the
emotional
world that does
issue.
not have an emotional
Yeah,
foreign policy?
I'd like to take this opportunity to.
The
I don't think this
for
is an
example,
occasion to.
extremely
How
emotional.
emotional can
About
anyone
what?
get? I mean, look, the issue is very simple. Reciprocity, unfortunately, has to be looked at very carefully. You cannot have a situation in which one side gives total immunity, because its reciprocity is part of immunity. It's about privileges, etc. I think we need to sit down with the United States and with others in Europe, etc., and have a serious, comprehensive discussion on this entire range of issues, so that there are no unexpected surprises. That's all I'm saying.
You need to have a conversation about how you can trade with each other, how you can make money, and how you can create
Exactly,
jobs
but that
for
relation-
everybody, for the world
No,
economy,
hold
for your
on.
economy,
I
for the
totally
European
agree with
economy.
you.
But you keep separating diplomacy from trade.
No,
and
I'm not.
that
It's
has
very
been-
much, it's central to it. In fact, diplomacy is about trade, the economic content. But again, in that also, you have to be very careful when you come to a situation. One compulsory license, which we issued in 2012 or 13, led to an entire series of investigations against us. I think we have to be careful. That those, if we are not compliant with the WTO TRIPS compliance or something else, there are avenues, but these things should be bilaterally. You cannot use unilateral
I have to come in
instruments.
here because we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. We didn't even get to talk about Bangladesh, so another day,
With
another
China
show.
also, maybe.
China, we need many more
We
hours
need
to
many
talk
more,
about.
exactly,
We
and
will.
not consular.
Cows in Bangladesh. It's a big issue. We need to
Bangladesh
talk to
is
you.
needs
Yes.
an entire.
We don't have convergence on Bangladesh also, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we leave it there. We will come back to discuss Bangladesh, China, many countries we left out. Shashi Tharoor, Hardeep Puri, Gardner Harris, Jason Burke, thanks for joining us on the Buck Stops here. Moving on now, big political story taking place today. The Congress has to decide whether heads need to roll. Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi expected to resign or at least offer to from their party positions at the meeting of the Congress Working Committee. Speaking out on the Congress debacle, somebody who's actually won his seat, Shashi Tharoor was another one. Kamal Nath is now, by the way, the senior most MP in Parliament, and he's talking some hard talk about what the Congress needs to do, talking to me earlier. Tomorrow afternoon, the Congress Working Committee, the highest decision-making body of the Congress party, will be meeting to deliberate on the debacle of the 2014 elections. A result in which, just to put it in perspective, the BJP has won many more seats in Uttar Pradesh than the Congress has won in all of India. This has raised questions not just on the future of the Congress, but also on the political value of brand Gandhi. There are also reports that the Congress President Sonia Gandhi and the Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi, who led this particular campaign, will be offering to resign from their party posts tomorrow. Will these resignations be accepted? Will there be a genuine shake-up in the Congress party? Well, joining me now is somebody who has emerged unscathed, one of the few Congress leaders to have done so from the Modi wave. In fact, he is now the senior-most member of parliament in the party, winning his seat for the 9th time. Outgoing Union Minister Kamal Nath joins me now to talk about what the road ahead is for the Congress. So congratulations on your own victory, especially since you're one of the few people in your party to be able to claim a victory. But what a disastrous performance for the Congress. The enormity of what's happened, has it sunk in? Is it beginning to sink in?
Barkha, let me correct you. I'm not the senior-most MP in the Congress party. I'm in the senior-most MP in the entire parliament, in the entire Lok Sabha. Now, coming back to your question, we have got a drubbing. This is a debacle which was unforeseen, and we have to introspect. I think really we need to engage and interact with people across the country at a block level, at a district level. Sitting in Delhi and 10 people engaging with each other is not going to help, because the problem is at the block level, at the booth level. So what is really going wrong? Why aren't we able to communicate? What is structurally wrong? Are our committees from the booth level to the block level to the district level, are they the kind of committees we should be having? Those are the kind of engagements we need to be having.
But Mr. Kamal Nath, when you locate the problem at the booth level, at the level of the party worker, it seems to me that you are going to the bottom, whereas you are actually absolving the top. The fact of the matter is that as much as this is a pro-Modi wave, it is also an anti-Congress wave. In fact, a massive anti-Congress wave. So my question is, where do you locate the responsibility for that? With the government, with the party, or both?
Well, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi have already said that they accept the blame. But I don't think the blame is entirely theirs. Saying that they accept the blame, accepting the blame is one thing, accepting the entire blame is another thing. And we had the government, we did, I think the UPA 1 and 2 did a great job. We had very good programs. We were not able to get it down to the people, whether it was our right to education, whether it was a roads program, whether it was our programs in the panchayats. These are things which people did not in the end buy, and they did not buy them because they thought that we should be having these in any case. We must remember that we have a very aspirational society, and the aspirational society was not connecting with us, and we were not connecting with the aspirational society.
That's very honest, but would it be fair to say that this entire rights-based approach, in a sense, of the Congress was out of sync with the new changing India, which was aspirational, as you yourself admit, which perhaps was looking for hope, for dreams, for entrepreneurship, whereas your party, your government, was merely handing out doles?
Well, between 2004 and 2009, we whipped up employment, the economy was booming. There were youngsters of 27, 20 years old buying houses, buying cars. We had, even in the last 5 years, the largest amount of sales of two-wheelers, four-wheelers, tractors. So this was all happening. There was growing disposable incomes in rural India. This all came about, flowed from the policies and the programs of the government. But this did not connect with the people because the people were looking at the future. I think it was that what we've got, we've got. Now what do you give us for the future? And if in the future you don't tell them. You don't tell them what you stand for. You don't tell them that we are going to give you so much more. We don't tell them that there are going to be opportunities for jobs. We don't tell them there will be opportunities for them for self-employment. Well, they won't connect with you, and that's exactly what happened.
But Mr. Kamal Nath, many people have also read this verdict as a desire among people for tough, decisive leadership. Do you acknowledge, are you willing to acknowledge that especially in the second term, a leadership crisis came to be associated with your government? Manmohan Singh was seen as weak and Rahul Gandhi was seen as not stepping up to the plate.
Well, everybody has their style of function. Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister was not a loud, boisterous man. That's his nature. It was the same Manmohan Singh we had in UPA 1. So why was UPA, the Manmohan Singh of UPA 1, not attacked for being quiet, but the Manmohan Singh of UPA 2 got attacked? I think what could have happened was that we could have explained things better, especially issues of corruption. Issues of corruption which were impacting all sections of society. Corruption is thus not happening in Delhi. It's happening at the panchayat level, it's happening at the village level, with the BDO, with the Tehsildar. It's happening at all levels. And people start relating that corruption with corruption in Delhi. So if we had to explain, we would have to explain the 2G scam, what it was all about, that we are talking about presumptuous loss. Now a presumptuous loss, a philosophy of presumptuous loss which was brought in is ridiculous nowhere in the world. Today there's a presumptuous loss that if I've done nothing as a minister for 2 hours, it's a presumptuous loss to the government because I'm getting a salary. And if I'm getting a salary and I've taken 1 day off, then so many hours of mine are a presumptuous loss to the government. I didn't work. So all these things were things which I think we could have explained better. And I think the Prime Minister, though he has his own style, and his style is really one of consensus, one of consent, he could have been more forthright. And if he was more forthright, people had a trust and faith in him because there was no finger pointing at him. And I think he should have, because he was above all corruption. So he could have been more loud about explaining these things.
You know, I was just going to say, Mr. Kamal Nath, that the difference between UPA 1 and UPA 2 as far as Manmohan Singh was concerned was that in UPA 1 he was seen to be somebody who was willing to take a position, which he did on the nuclear deal, irrespective of whether the rest of his party supported him or not. In UPA 2, however, he never took a position, he never asserted himself. He could, for example, have stopped A. Raja from coming back to the cabinet. He did not do so. And to your point about 2G, no matter what you think, the fact is that A. Raja is seen to be somebody who subverted that particular first come, first serve policy. So would you concede that Manmohan Singh did not assert himself in UPA 2?
It was a process. It was a process problem. In that process, if there were charges of corruption, not in the policy framed by the government. Now, if the process was abused by someone, he was prosecuted. He went to jail. The UPA government has prosecuted more politicians of all parties, more bureaucrats, have prosecuted launched prosecutions against more people than any government in the history. We must not forget that we did not let corruption go by. The Prime Minister acted, and that was the most important thing.
Now, you say that the Prime Minister could have been more communicative, more forthright, and that's honest of you. But what about the absence of communication of the other top leaders in the Congress power establishment? Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi didn't speak either.
Well, it was a government issue, and Sonia Gandhi never spoke about government issues. Let's recognize that. You know, you say that Manmohan Singh didn't talk much. Well, what do you have today? You're saying we had a Manmohan Singh who did not talk, and you have a Mr. Narendra Modi who can't stop talking. And is this going to solve the problems of this country? That here you have somebody who just cannot stop talking. And on the other hand, because he can't stop talking, you're saying, why does Manmohan Singh not talk? This I find very amusing.
But, you know, since you've been honest enough to say that there was a disconnect with aspirational India, with younger India, the current generation, they have global exposure to the world. They're used to leaders like Obama and Cameron who talk regularly to the media. They have a much more informal style. So surely you have to concede that communication all around was a huge problem.
It was. I completely agree with you that communication has been a big problem for the Congress party because it's not been our style of campaigning. That's not been, if you've seen all the campaigns, and I have seen campaigns now over the last, over 35 years, that the communication is entirely different. Here you You had the BJP campaigning, attacking the government, politics of criticism, politics of promises, politics of whipping up hopes. Now, the Congress party doesn't do that because we cannot. We cannot afford to be whipping up hopes which we can't meet. And the BJP, for them, either it was a one-time shot that they were whipping up these hopes. Even for the last 2 days, they are saying, now we are going to have a new India. Now, this is all, really, really in the abstract. This is all ridiculous. That you're going to have a new India, here comes a new government, here comes a new leader, here comes a new set of ministers who are going to be launching India into a completely different orbit. This has a lifespan of 3 or 4 months. It doesn't have more of a lifespan.
Talk a little bit about Rahul Gandhi. Let's talk about him. Rahul Gandhi, there is a perception that the rest of the party is trying to shield him, Mr. Kamal Nath. If we can just bring up that defining image of Rahul Gandhi when he was smiling, in fact, right after, when he came out to address the media, right after that Congress debacle. There's a perception that the party is trying to shield Rahul Gandhi, and that tomorrow when he offers his resignation, all of you will say, no, no, please don't. Why? Why this attempt to shield Rahul Gandhi? Look at the statistics. He had 43% attendance in Parliament compared to over 70% for the average MP. He never asked a question. He seemed cavalier and as I said, smiling after that debacle, casual almost. Has he not become a failed leader for the Congress?
Well, Rahul Gandhi has just come to the forefront 8 months ago. Let's not forget that he only came in 8 months ago. And I don't know what you mean that he was smiling, or I didn't see that. But if you expected him to be there crying, then it would have been a very, very strange situation. He shouldn't have come. What did you want him to come out there and start crying in front of the cameras? That was not what was expected. So I suppose if what you're saying is correct, he wanted to look brave, and it was maybe the appearance of being brave instead of looking crestfallen, looking absolutely gone. Maybe that's the right thing he did.
Are you saying that tomorrow, when and if they offer to resign, you at least will not be in favor of that?
I would certainly persuade them. I don't know, you're saying if, because so many of your questions are prefaced with a if. But if they were to resign, or if they were to ask, I would certainly try and prevail upon them that no, the responsibility, you have already accepted responsibility. Responsibility is of governments. Responsibility is of state leaders. Then why shouldn't I be held responsible for the debacle in Madhya Pradesh? Why shouldn't so-and-so be held responsible for the debacle in the district or in a state? There's no end to this. And I think that it's very important that everybody comes together. There's introspection, there's realization, there's analysis of what went wrong. Because politics has changed over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years. Congress must change with the change in politics. Because if the Congress party does not change and politics keeps changing, we have a new electorate every 5 years, a new generation of voters come in every 5-10 years. Now, they come in with different hopes and different aspirations. I remember 25 years ago or 35 years ago when I first came into Parliament, nobody wanted anything other than a government job. Nobody wanted to leave the district. That's changed so much. Nobody thought of IT. Nobody thought of self-employment. And so much has changed. Aspirations have changed. And today we have become the largest aspirational society on this planet. It is this aspirational society which Congress has to address.
Okay, let me ask you what happens in Parliament now, Mr. Kamal Nath. You are, as you said, the senior most MP across parties in Parliament. It's not clear yet whether the Congress will even get LOP. It certainly doesn't have the numbers necessarily. The Speaker has to take that decision. But if it does, will you be the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha?
Well, I haven't given that a thought at all, whether what's going to be there. But we must be a responsible opposition. We must be completely the opposite of the opposition which was there by the BJP and by the NDA in the past. And I said so. I was the Parliamentary Affairs Minister. And I said so, that a day will come when the shoe will be on the other foot. Now the shoe is on the other foot. But I'm not going to kick them with that. I don't think we should be kicking them with that. We should be trying to protect the interests of the country. We should ensure that the BJP government doesn't go berserk We must ensure that what's good for the country, because in the end, we are talking, the Congress party has stood for the good of the country. Just because a good legislation may come, and we are not going to oppose it for the sake of opposing it. That's what the BJP did for the last 5 years.
But, let me ask you in the end, what do you believe should be the role now of Congress chief ministers? If we can just bring up the statistics now, please. They tell their own story, Mr. Kamal Nath, and you know these statistics as well as I do. There are 10 states where the Congress has not even got a single seat. Basically, it's drawn a blank in 10 of these seats. There is no state where the Congress is in double digits. In Delhi, the Congress is in the 3rd position in all 7 seats. In Maharashtra, it's got 2 seats, one of which has been won by Ashok Chavan. My question to you is, Nitish Kumar has resigned, M.K. Stalin has resigned from his party post. What is going to be the shake-up in the Congress? Since you're saying that it serves no purpose for Rahul and Sonia to resign, are you also saying that the chief ministers in non-performing states in the Lok Sabha should not resign as well?
Well, these offers to resign are there. I think, and I'm going to digress for a minute on this, that we need to make the states more autonomous politically. If a chief minister thinks that this is his responsibility entirely, it's because of the performance of his state government, then he should resign. But if he thinks that he's carrying the baggage of the central government or carrying the baggage of something else, why should he resign? So we should leave it to the state governments as much as we should leave the politics of the states to the states, not try and control it from Delhi. Politics is best left. That's the big change, a paradigm shift which has taken place. And that's taking place, which the Congress will have to address, that how do we deal with the states? Should we try and control everything from here, or leave it to the states, the state leadership to control it? That is the only way it's going to happen.
So that's an important admission. You're basically saying or admitting that the Congress has failed to empower its state leaders.
I'd say empower the state organization, not the state leaders. And if a smallest decision relating to the Congress organization has to be taken from Delhi, then it doesn't work, because those who have access to Delhi, there are people who come from districts, who come to Delhi and say that क्षेत्र हमारे साथ है, जिला हमारे साथ है, and they go back to the district and say Delhi हमारे साथ है, and this becomes the politics. Now this is what we should really wake up to. This should be a very big wake-up call.
And the high command culture, basically, that phrase, an archaic phrase in any case. Let me ask you a last question. If you had to recommend one surgical solution, because sometimes you need surgery to heal things, what would it be for the Congress party?
I think we should have a working committee which is elected, and Rahul Gandhi has been saying this for the last 2 years, that we should have a working committee which is elected. And all those who, to protect themselves, oppose this, are causing immense damage. I completely agree with Mr. Rahul Gandhi. We should have an elected working committee. Then this culture of people, who are being bestowed with patronage is going to end.
That's candidly said. Kamal Nath, thank you so much for talking to us. It's going to be an interesting, stormy meeting of that Congress Working Committee tomorrow. That Kamal Nath is actually calling for elections too, saying that internal democracy is needed within the Congress for the politics of patronage to end, and that the Prime Minister should have been much more forthright than he was.